with the questions now being re-added as maps. In order to pass down our question text here, it's not enough to select a question by index. Instead, now in there, we of course have our question text key, which we're now interested in. So we're interested in the value, of course, but we do access this value through its key. Now, how do you tell Dart that you want to get the value for a specific key? Down here, I'm selecting a specific question in my questions list. And that's important. This list here is still a list. It's a list which now holds maps, and in this map we have a combination of string keys and then various objects. And Dart is inferring that we have a map with object values here because we have a mixture of values. Here we have a string value and here we have a list value. And therefore Dart goes back to the generic parent type, which every object has in Dart, and that would be, well, object, because everything is an object. So we have a list of maps where every map has a string key and different kinds of values. How do we get access to the value now? Here we're accessing a specific question through its index, and therefore now this here yields us a map. For index 0, it yields us the first map. For index 1, it yields us the second map. If we now want to get access to a specific key, we again use squared brackets here, so not curly braces, but square brackets. We use square brackets to access a key in a map, and we simply use the key name in here, inside of the square brackets. So on all the questions, I'm accessing the question with index 0, 1, 2, and so on. And then here, for the chosen question map, I access the value with the key question text. So that means I access this value, or this value, and it's this string which then gets forwarded to the question. Awesome. We can forward our value to the question. That's of course pretty neat. Now, how can we create our answers dynamically based on the selected question? We always have 4 answers, so we could hard code our answers here. But of course, we could also have one question with 4 answers and another question with only 3 answers. So it would be nice if we could create these answer widgets dynamically based on the current question. And that, of course, can be done with Dart. Instead of hard coding the answer widgets here, what you can do is you can access your questions here. So access questions, which is a list. And now, and that's really nice, map that list into something else. That means transform that list into something else. So that instead of a list of maps, we have a list of widgets. And that list of widgets could then be added here and merged into our list of widgets in that column. For that, you have the map method. Again, questions is a list, and a list is a class, an object in Dart, and that class defines a map method. The map method executes a function, which you have to pass as an argument to map, on every element in the list on which you're calling map. So in this case, on every element in the questions list. So we have to pass a function to map, and you could use a named function, which you could create up here, or you use an anonymous function, since we really only need that function here and in no other place of our file. So here I'll define a function, and that function automatically receives an argument itself, which will be passed in by Dart, and that's the current element we're looking at, because this function will be executed for every element in the questions list, and the current element for the current function execution, that is received as an argument inside of this function, which is applied to every element. So here we get the question, single question we're looking at, and now in here we have to return a new value, because map returns us basically a new list where we don't have to keep the old structure. So it doesn't have to be a list of maps. It can be a list of widgets, and that could be something we merge here into the column. Now for that, we want to return a widget here, because we want to, for every element in questions, we want to return a new element which basically replaces it, and that should be a widget now. So here I want to create a new answer widget. And to that answer widget, I want to forward question. However, we're actually calling map on the wrong thing now, because questions is a list of maps, right? Actually, I want to go through all my answers for the question we're currently looking at. So we should fine tune this a little bit. And here we access questions for the currently selected question index. And there we now select a key, and that key now should be answers. And that will then give us a list of answers. And that's actually what I'm interested in here. So map now takes a function which runs on all our answers. And hence in here I get answer. And I forward that answer to my answer widget. Now here I'm getting an error that map isn't defined on the class object. And the problem we're having here is that Dart fails to infer that the answers key always holds a list. It does here, but Dart simply doesn't see that. It's simply something Dart can't detect. Now to fix that, we can tell Dart that answers is a list by wrapping this part all the way up to after this answers key we're accessing here into parentheses and adding the as keyword, which allows us to tell Dart, hey, this will have a specific type. I know it. And we know that this will be of type list full of strings. Whoops, string should have a capital S. So now we tell Dart that answer here, answers which we access, will actually be a list of strings. And the error we're now getting is a different error, which we'll fix later, no worries. This, however, will work now. We can map a list of strings. Answer here, therefore, is a string. And to answer, we forward that string. Now, of course, at the moment, answer doesn't take a string. It only takes this function handler. So we should accept a second argument here in the answer widget, which is the answer text we want to output. And I also want to store this in a property here, answer text. And therefore, actually here in the constructor list, let's use this answer text, which then automatically assigns the incoming value to this property. And the answer text is then what we can use down there in our answer widget. So now we're accepting answer text, but still here when we create the widget, the answer text, which is inside of answer, is not the first value we should pass to the answer widget, but the second one. The first value should be our handler for the chosen answer. And for that, we of course still want to pass a pointer to our underscore answer question function here. So let's forward this for every answer widget we're creating. That was a lot of work, and I know that this can be a confusing setup here, mapping a list into a list of widgets. What's the idea here? Well, the idea really is that now we have a list of widgets here in the end, at least almost, because map doesn't give us a list, but a so-called iterable, which is kind of a parent class for all the different iterables. A map would also be an iterable. And to really tell Dart that we want a list here and not a map or anything else, we can add a dot after this whole operation and call toList. And now this converts the value map gives us to a list. Also, please note that map does not change the original questions list. It does not change this variable or the value in there. It generates a new list instead, based on the old list, and then the transformation we do in the body of that function we pass to map. The remaining problem now is that we have a list here, and here column also takes a list of widgets, but with that we would have a nested list. We would add a list in a list. Actually, we want to have a couple of individual items in that list of children. And to get that, we can use another operator that's available in Dart. It's the so-called spread operator. You can add 3 dots in front of this, and now I get a warning because it's a relatively new operator, but it is supported in the recent versions of Dart. And what this spread operator does, what these 3 dots do here, is they take a list, which is exactly what we have here, and they pull all the values in that list out of it and add them to the surrounding list as individual values, so that we don't add a list to a list, but the values of a list to a list, having only one list without a nested list. So this is what we're doing here. And with that, we're having a transformation where we transform every answer into an answer widget. We then make sure that this is a list, and then we take these generated answer widgets and we add it to this list here. That was a lot of work, of course, but with that, if we save this, we indeed see 4 values here for our 4 answers. And if I choose one and we go to the next question, you see that these answers change. And if I click again, since I already was on the second question, now I get an error because now I try to advance to a question which we don't have. Of course, we could implement checks that avoid that we can go to a question which we don't have, but for the moment, I'm happy with the current state.